Alright, in this video, Zach is going to be creating the Nanite Probe.
That's right. Now, let's go ahead and get started by creating our document, which of course is 64 by 64. Once again, I'll press F and I'll zoom us in a little bit. Now, the thing about the Nanite Probe is that it's more of a mechanical thing than it is like an organic surface, so it's not the kind of thing we're going to be hand drawing very much. But at the same time, we want it to kind of have a similar look to what's already there. We don't want to break our style too much. So what I'm going to do, or we don't want to break it at all, really.
Exactly.
So what we're going to do is start off with a new layer that I'm going to call Probe Body, I suppose, and we're going to start off by putting a guide down, and let's put another guide down so that I have the dead center of our document nice and set up there. Now I'm going to grab my elliptical marquee tool, put our mouse right in the middle of that, so right on the crosshairs. Start dragging out an elliptical selection, hold down Alt and then Shift so you get a nice perfect circle. Now, this is going to be a fairly small little creature here. We're not going to make him really big. So let's say somewhere around, not quite halfway. Let's say that works.
Okay.
Okay, so now with that in place, let's pick a color for it. Now I'm going to choose something along the lines of gray, and you could just hit Alt-Delete to drop that down. Now, if you wanted this to be editable, an option would be to, while you had your selection, so let me hold down Control and get my selection back, you could do a solid color. And so in this way, you have your just a color swatch that you can double-click and change the color of your probe at any time. It's however you want to do it. So, but I was pretty sure I wanted gray, so we'll go ahead and leave that. We'll throw this one out. All right, so now that we have the body in place, let's shade it up a little bit, make it look a little more spherical. I'm going to hit Control-H to hide out my guides for now. I don't think I'll be needing them for a little bit. I'm going to double-click on the far right-hand side of this layer to bring up Layer Styles. And I'll move documents around to make the most out of my screen space. Let's bring on a gradient overlay. Let's set its blend mode to overlay. I'm going to take its style and set it to radial. We'll also reverse this, and we could pull back on the opacity, but I don't want to. Instead, we're going to take our gradient itself and start adjusting a few things. We'll increase the size of the white just a little bit. We'll take our black swatch, and we'll start pulling that out just a tad. It doesn't need to be quite so dark. So somewhere around 75% gray. Let's click OK. Now, click OK to finish off the colorization of your gradient, but while you're still here inside the gradient overlay box, you can pull this up to the upper right just a tad, and it starts to give you more of a spherical look with the application there. So then let's also put on a stroke, and that's a little much. Let's pull that down to a single pixel and something not quite black, or not, something just like a very, very dark gray. And let's put this on the inside instead of the outside. So it's just adding a little bit more visual depth to what we had. Maybe just a little bit lighter. I don't know. And I want to see if it looks better on the center. It's hard to say. Maybe I'll just leave that out entirely. I had it there originally, but I don't know if I'm satisfied with it. Okay. So anyways, back to what I was doing. Let's go ahead and hit Control-H to bring our guides back up. Now, there's some decorations we want to put on this guy, some pinstriping that'll just kind of define various parts of the body. So I'm going to create a new layer, and we'll call this Detail Stripes. And this we're going to create with our pencil tool, because we are working with so few pixels here that we have to be really careful about how we do this kind of stuff. So pick any color again that you like. It doesn't really matter. For contrast, so I can see what I'm doing, I'm going to pick a super bright, put your eyes out green, and we'll just paint, say, I guess from right about here. I'll just paint straight down. I'm holding the Shift key so I can get a nice straight line. And then I'm going to count my pixels. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by the looks of that. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I almost can't see them there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that's right about here. No, that's one. That's not far over. There we go. Dink. Is that right?
You need to go down one.
Well, I know. I was worried about the left-right distance. So anyways, you just want them to be even on either side. Of course, you could paint one and flip it over, however you wanted to do that. I'm just trying to do it all by hand for sake of speed. So now let's paint another one that connects over here, and then we'll just branch that right over to here. And that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll just paint that over and paint that over. And there we go. So we have some nice little detail stripes in place. Now we don't want them to stay this color, but don't worry about that for now. While we're here, let's also put the little medical cross that's going to be on this. So notice I'm just kind of painting that a pixel at a time so I can keep the proportions just right. So there we go, little cross right in the middle of it. Now, of course, we probably don't want it to stay super ultra mega bright green. So let's double click on the right hand side of the layer again to bring up our layer styles. And it's not going to let me zoom out, so I'm going to zoom out before I bring up layer styles, just so we can make the most of our screen space. And we're going to drop on a color overlay, which I think bright red's going to work out really well, but let's also put on a gradient overlay. Now, you don't even see the gradient overlay because the color overlay actually shows up on top of that. So what we're going to do is take our color overlay, and we'll set this over to multiply. Now let's come back down to our gradient overlay and change a few things around. Very much like what we did before, we're going to set up a radial gradient. We're going to reverse that. Let's also increase the scale quite a bit, and then we'll come in and start adjusting the white a little bit. So we get kind of darkening around the edges, but the center of it stays primarily red.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that takes care of our detail striping. Now, the next thing I want to do is kind of darken up these areas here on the left and right-hand side of the probe. And to do that, I'm going to hold down Control and select our entire probe's body. Let's grab our rectangular marquee tool, and I'll set up to subtractive selection, and we'll subtract out the top, including those 2 red lines. We'll subtract out the bottom, including those 2 red lines, and then we'll really carefully subtract out the middle, including those lines as well. So we just have these 2 little areas on either side. We'll make a new layer, and we'll call this Side Darkener. And let's fill this with something. I have bright green selected, so that'll work. We'll just fill it with bright neon green. Jump back into our layer styles again. And the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to grab the fill for our layer, the fill opacity, and pull that down to 0. So we don't see the actual paint at all. That bright green completely disappears. What we're going to have instead is a gradient overlay, which we will set to reflected. And let's reverse that, and then let's rotate that out to 0, so we end up with darkening on either side, and we could set this over to a multiply type and then just pull down that opacity. So it's just darkening up those little areas just a tiny little bit, but it's still keeping some shading going on in there. Okay, now with that done, the next thing I'm going to add are some, it's kind of hard to say, it's like almost like grading that's inside these darkened areas. I think that's the word I'm going to go for anyway. So let's grab black as our color, so I'll just hit D. And I'm going to paint a black stripe right here, and we'll put the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to skip 2 pixels. We'll paint another one. And then just skip 1 pixel and paint 1 more. So it looks like they get denser as you go down the sides of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So be sure you occasionally pull all the way back so you can see what this looks like. So there it is at 100. You can kind of get an idea of where it's going. Now, this is just something I want to do. I'm going to grab my detail stripes layer and grab my pencil. And we're going to drop down some little decorative dots that also get a little closer together as you go down the ball. For no real reason other than I think they need to be there. And we have 2 pixels there, so we'll skip 2 and then skip 1. And there we go. And I think I'm starting to see why I put that stroke there in the first place, just to kind of darken up the outer edge of that ball. So I might put that back down. I know I'm sitting here being indecisive, so if you'd like to boo your monitor, please feel free, with my blessing, to boo me. So there we go. Just get a little bit of darkening there around the outer edge. Nothing, even that's a little too dark over here. So now I'm all picky. So let's pull that back up. I think I can live with that. Okay, so with that, we have all of the key elements that we need for our sphere, but we only have one problem. It's really smooth and really well rendered and just a little too pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And we need something that looks a little more hand-drawn. So what I'm going to do is take our probe body, and just above that, I'm going to drop on a posterized layer. And the default 4 levels are going to be fine, and you can see what that does if you zoom in. It takes our colors and it breaks it up into 4 distinct colors, ranging from white to black in this case, and it's just getting a few shades of gray. Now, if you need to make adjustments to that, you can go right underneath your posterize, and you can add on a brightness contrast. And the cool thing about doing that is you can actually change the radius of those bands using this a little bit. So you can tighten up that highlight however you want to, and so on and so forth. So do something that makes you happy. Now, the problem here is, like, we've gone from one extreme entirely over to the other.
Mm-hmm.
This now, instead of looking too rendered, now looks almost too stylized. So we need a nice middle ground. So what I'm going to do is take my posterize and my brightness contrast. We're going to drop those into their own group, which I'll call something like stylization, just because that's cool, I think, if I even spelled it right. And then we'll take our group, and I'll pull down its overall opacity, so that what we're doing is we're blending in between the original shading that was there and this new stylized opacity, or this new stylized shading.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere around a 25% is going to look pretty good, I think. Let's go ahead and back out and have a look. And I think that's going to work.
Okay.
I mean, of course, you've got all sorts of control if you needed to make your highlight a little bigger, a little smaller, but that's really everything we need to have our Nanite Probe. So the next step would be to come in here and just remove out our background. Let's go ahead and go to File, Save As, and we'll jump into our PSDs, and we'll call this probe_1. Again, I like leaving that 1 in there in case I go back and make an adjustment or make another version later. And let's go to File, Save As one more time. Jump back down to PNGs, and we have our probe.png with no interlacing, and with that, we are done.
Okay, and that is going to conclude this video. Thanks a lot.